another handful of minutes here. I don't think I asked you, Malcolm, how many locations you are responsible for globally.
Globally, I can say in the US, we have about 300 leases that we manage. So we have
Wow.
about that many locations where we actually have physical bricks and mortar. But we also operate in a concept we call Randstad in-house services, where we actually sit on site with some of our larger clients. And so we probably have another 300 of those. So.
Oh, really? Where you've taken a lease on a space that's inside your client or across the
Well,
street
usually
from your
we just have a small team that's kind of embedded in one of
see.
our client locations, so that we're kind of dedicated to them.
I see. And then the 100,000 global workforce is global, or North America is a big chunk of that?
That's North America, and that is inclusive of both what we call our internal employees and those employees that we place on client and customer sites. So on any given week on our payroll runs for what we call external talent, we'll have 80,000 plus.
Wow, massive. We'll get into how all that's been changing and how you've been managing that. I suppose you guys have a real finger on the pulse of the North American economy, right? I mean, other people wait for the payroll reports to come out every month, but I guess you guys see them a month in advance.
Yeah, this industry it tends to be a bellwether industry for the general labor market in the U.S. And we will start to slow down before it's reported in the news, and we will start to speed up before it's reported in the news. Back in 2009, after this, 2007, 2008 financial crisis, we were already starting to see improvement in late 2009 before anybody else was even seeing it. So, yeah, we very much are a bellwether indicator of the labor market. I could talk about that all day in a separate webinar if you would like.
I had one of the senior ADP people on with me a few weeks back, and I was hearing a little bit of a narrative like that.
Yeah, they have one of the most famous reports in the world. They actually release usually before the Bureau of Labor Statistics reports their annual employment and unemployment rates. And the ADP one is a very good indicator because they're a huge payrolling company, so they see that impact even before BLS does.
Well, we may as well get started. I'll start perhaps by welcoming you, Jim Link, Chief Human Resource Officer for Randstad, North America, Malcolm Smith, Senior Vice President for Corporate Finance, and I guess part of your duties there involve all those hundreds of locations that you guys operate out of. Thank you very much for joining me to talk about this impending return to work that we all face, and I suppose you guys have been thinking about it a lot. The complexity and scope of your operations mean it couldn't be any other way. I honestly have been surprised. I've been speaking to heads of real estate from some very large companies in either this format or because they were customers of Knotel over the last 90 days or so. And oh man, it's been a head spinning quarter, right? I mean, like, talk to people and they're shutting down offices, and then they're worried about safety. They're worried about COVID breakouts. And now you got to worry about return to work. I mean, and if you're going to return to 300 locations in a period of 90 days, the level of complexity on that, it must just be overwhelming. I'm sure you'll have quite a lot of wisdom to share. A couple of things just up top from me, just to give you some context on Knotel. And since this is our first time speaking publicly since the end of Q2, I'll give you a little context on our experience, and let's see how it fits into your view of the world. We're a pretty young company. We only got started about, let's say, 4.5 years ago. January 2016, we do our first workplace deal. And over the course of the last few years, we were just a tiny little startup in this flexible workplace world. We were compared all the time to co-working, and we really set our sights firmly on, let's just do corporates, let's just do tailored things. So it looks and feels like an office, the kind of thing they expect, except we manage it for them, we make it flexible for them. And we grew a ton. At the end of last year, and by the time we got to the end of Q1 this year, we had announced some of our results, and we hit about 370 million of revenue run rate. just in a handful of years. And all the companies I've ever started, we've never gotten that big that fast. It has been a head spinning experience for us. But Q2, like if all out growth is head spinning, this last 90 days has been unbelievable. I mean, we had to make some really big changes in the business and prepare ourselves for a really difficult, potentially year, maybe more than a year. What we saw in Q2 was a really difficult quarter. We lost about 20% of our revenue in Q2. So we finished, I think officially it's like down 10%, but I think there's another 10% that's probably not going to end up coming through. So I'm thinking that the impact of Q2 on Knotel was a minus 20% off top line. And that's been really hard. We had to reduce a lot of our costs. You know, we took a bunch of people out of the organization, and we have been staying really focused on getting through this year. I think at the end of Q1, we made some really formal announcements for folks. And as we close up the actual books on our Q2, just for those in the press or whoever, we will make a pretty formal and transparent set of announcements about where we're at. But, you know, in some ways, there are some real signs of life out there. The European markets for us are back open. Demand is quite strong. The majority of our markets are profitable in Q2. And even some of the ones that were lagging behind are getting more profitable now. We've been exiting some of the supply side stuff that we hold, and that process continues. And it's really transforming the business in a way I think that'll be effective. But of course, the most traumatic thing was really just the last 2 months, and it was Black Lives Matter. I was just gobsmacked by that. I mean, if you think like business adversity is tough, just the pure emotional reaction of our people to the trauma in the streets and then the trauma it brought out in their own experience was, I think, the hardest thing I've ever had to deal with. And honestly, I mean, it has transformed our company, and we'll talk about what that means for leaders like you guys. For us, I think we've adopted the mission of moving towards an anti-racist organization and actually trying to move the needle on racism, as opposed to a more mild version, like a diversity and inclusion notion. And so hopefully that'll all be stuff we get to as we speak. But it's really a privilege to have you here. And in some ways, I'm greedy because it's just your advice to me. But I know we've got close to 100 people tuned in, and I think there's a lot of wisdom you'll be able to share. There's a bunch of other heads of real estate, heads of HR. And maybe a good place to start, Jim, is you're the head of HR for 100,000 headcount organization in North America, right? Randstad is a giant, staffing giant, which perhaps adds more complexity because your folks are working in different other organizations. You provide flexibility perhaps to your customers, so staffing means things are going up and down. How have these last few months been?
Well, there's no one good descriptor for the last few months. I think when I look back to the 1st of March and we began to get an understanding of what might be coming, you know, because all of this obviously started in China, and as we watched this move across the world in our own business lines, by the time North America was beginning to feel the impact, we were had the time to prepare. And I think there are a couple of things that stand out in my mind as being particularly significant. One was we had always at Randstad had a business continuity team and a business continuity plan in place. And that team would run practice drills, assuming that, you know, terrible things happened in the world, like we lost internet service, or, you know, our servers all crashed, or you know, there was a major hurricane or disaster, but we had never prepared a drill where there was a pandemic. But the practice actually helped us. So by the time that we were, I actually activated the business continuity team in late February in North America. And so by the time that we began to really see impact of people getting sick on a large scale, we already had plans in place to close our offices, for people to work voluntarily from home whenever they could. And the real opportunity that we found was we had always been a company that was focused on agility. So we were a little bit ahead of the remote work and work from home spectrum compared to a lot of our clients and customers. But nevertheless, we found ourselves as soon as we started putting people, you know, in home offices, we had technology issues we had to think about. We had safety and security concerns that we had to think about. We had all types of issues about keeping people connected, not just from a technological perspective, but from an emotional connection as well, and ensuring that they were aligned with the company and the culture, and that they still felt that there was opportunity to make a difference in our company. And honestly, those softer science things, in many ways became more difficult for us because we hadn't done as much preparation work. It's much easier to ensure everyone has a laptop, for example, than it is to ensure that everyone has the emotional readiness to be isolated for months. So we spent a lot of time making those connections and getting people aware, and still are doing that today, by the way. But if we did anything particularly well, we had practiced for an episode, certainly not of this duration or this magnitude, but we had plans in place to be prepared. And I think that was the single most important thing we had done.
I presume, Malcolm, this had massive consequences for your obligations across all those properties. There's a people dimension. You had to, I don't know, I guess, shut them down, secure them, at some point prepare them to come back, but you might have even been renegotiating or changing your deals on those.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, you know, I'd have to say that it was easier to get everyone remote than to get everyone back. You know, within a matter of days at the beginning of March, we were able to effectively change all of our workforce in the US from working effectively in the office to be effectively working remotely, and really within a matter of days. And so, as Jim said, there were a few things that we had to deal with to kind of make that smoothly, but I think we were very successful in having a smooth transition that really had very little of any disruption to our clients and our talent, our external talent that we put to work. So we were very happy with that process. And as Jim mentioned, you know, we had an infrastructure and a way of working there already to kind of make that happen. And we were able to quickly mobilize teams to work on that. So, you know, we ironed out some of those, any kind of teething issues with that. So then we quickly got into thinking about recovery, right? So once we had everyone safe and sound and settled remotely, it's then a case of how are we going to and when are we going to get everyone back to work? And so,
but Malcolm, let me press you on, you know, what's the permanent thing? I mean, some part of this you're kind of scrambling because you're like, all right, return to work is happening, let's deploy the processes. But you're not so sure how many people will be back and for how long and when and in what distribution, right? I mean, you were mentioning you run many hundreds of properties that people work from around the country. Is that picture the same? Like if you're a year in the future, it's the same 300, the same size?
Absolutely, it's a great question. So fortunately, we had embarked upon a process of our, we called it workplace transformation in January. We wanted to reinvent our vision of our real estate strategy going forward. And so we had actually engaged, yeah, we had engaged with our real estate partner, Transwestern, to help us on a project to kind of reinvent what we would look like in the future. You know, and I joke that I'm so glad we started that in January and not in September last year, because if we'd done it then, we would be throwing it in the trash. So, so we had already started a process, and we were already thinking about how we would work in the future as Randstad and what our locations and offices and environments would need to look like to support that. So we started in January, February. We didn't get too far into the process, and then COVID hit. We took probably a little bit of a pause for a month or so because we were everyone was working on getting everyone remote. So, but then we got back into it, and we're right now in the process where we've developed our future workplace strategy, and we're rolling out our real estate strategy of how to support that. One of the positive things I'd say from this perspective from that is, you know, we worked previously with really most people being assigned a seat in an office. And in a lot of places when we would challenge that, we would, you know, get a lot of pushback on that. Now with this pandemic, we've kind of proven out that we can do it, right? So now we've got over that hurdle. The question is, what do we want to do in the future? And so Part of what we did is we did a workplace strategy survey with our employees, and we got their feedback on how they were working just now and what they would like to do in the future. And we had about 85% of our employees who participated in the survey said they would like some kind of remote working in the future. So whether that's 1 day or 5 days a week, they definitely wanted more of that. And so, we're definitely looking at doing something different in the future. Before we had a 1-to-1 desk ratio. In the future, we're starting to look at giving people some flexibility in what they do. So that's been a big theme out of that. And
are you assuming though, Malcolm, that these let's say it's one desk for 2 people, but they're not always there. Are those desks further apart from each other? I mean, is there a fundamental redesign that's part of this too?
Yes, one of the things that we've looked at is really what is it that we are going to be doing in the office when we're there, right? So what we find is that people actually do quite well remotely at what we call kind of focused work, and being able to concentrate and spend kind of a little bit uninterrupted time on their work. But when they do go back to the office eventually, it'll be a little bit less of that kind of dedicated focus work and a little bit more of a collaborative work. So it's a little bit tricky in this situation to think of how that will look in the future, because right now we're not really having people
you got to sort of test a bit, don't you? So, I mean, if you came up with all the answers just blindly,
exactly.
it'd be premature.
But definitely, yes. So definitely it would be different in the future than what we have just now. And we're looking to be, have desks, a little bit of less ratio, but then have more circulation space, more collaborative space, and even looking at the 6-foot layout of our individual desks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe I'll come to Jim here, because you mentioned surveying your people and trying to learn what's on their mind and how they feel. And it's kind of a very deep question, I'm sure, for a chief human resources officer, being in tune with how are your people surviving this moment? Where do they want to be going forward? How are they emotionally? How are the teams? I mean, do you do performance reviews in a time like this? How can you do the sort of run the business stuff that, especially for people leaders, for the kind of stuff that is so nuanced and so personal? You're not going to do a performance review as an email or something. Can you do it this way? And how do you get a feeling for how the organization is dealing with it?
Yeah, well, let me start first with how you get and solicit what's going on, right, with your work population. At Randstad, we had developed 3 or 4 years ago a tool that was a survey tool that went out sometimes monthly, but normally quarterly, depending upon which country you were in around the world. And that was a very typical survey tool, asking normal survey questions, with the exception that it was real time. So as soon as we got an appropriate number of responses from in any particular manager's area of responsibility, we could then, in a very interactive, quick way, start to see what the comments and the numerical feedback was from any particular question that was asked. So that real-time frequency is something that we had grown accustomed to in Randstad over the last 3 years. However, when COVID hit, that frequency was just not acceptable. So we actually went from a quarterly surveying methodology to a weekly surveying methodology. Every Friday, we would survey our entire workforce around the world. And we developed what we called the COVID questions. And so these were very specifically targeted toward asking about, how have you adapted? Do you have the technological skills that are capabilities to do your job? Are you feeling productive? Are you feeling connected? Do you have a sense of isolationism or loneliness? So we were trying to check in both on people's scientific side with the tools and technology to do the job, but also on their emotional side to ensure that they still felt connected to our organization and that they had a resource to go to in the form of our employee assistance line if they needed help on more of the emotional side or mental side. And surprisingly, we began to see that as we surveyed people and the depth and duration of the lockdowns continued, sure enough, people really started reaching out to each other. They started building collaborative networks. They started utilizing the tools like we're using right now in a more cooperative way to actually fill that human contact gap that is out there and that still persists today. The other tool that's very, very important, I believe, as a human resources practitioner is to have learning and development capabilities in place. Randstad's lucky in that we have a very good learning management system. And I saw rapid and steep increases in a very short order of time in the use of that LMS over the course of the time period. There was one time on a Tuesday a few weeks ago, whenever the usage of that LMS on that particular day was 10 times the norm.
Wow.
So people are taking that opportunity, Amol, to get in there and to upgrade their skills, to reskill, to new skill themselves, to learn how to adapt. And if you have a good LMS, right, you're covering all kinds of learning opportunities, everything from what may seem like trivial or unimportant, all the way through to business development courses on a specific skill or task within your job.
Is there a course or two that surprised you that was super popular at this moment?
You know, a little bit. We knew during the 2008-2009 crisis that people also used that opportunity to gain new skill, but not to this magnitude that we're still seeing here today. So that LMS tool was always out there and available, and people tended to use it when a training event was prescribed to them or required of them, like annual sexual harassment training or something like that. But what we found is that they began to invest more in their own skill development and learning as a result of this crisis. And so if anything good came out, it's that this whole idea of upskilling, new skilling, and reskilling is taking place certainly within our workforce. And from what I hear from my colleagues out there, similar things are happening in theirs as long as they have a tool to get that to employees.
On that survey, on this sort of weekly cadence, you know, I guess you were trying to keep a real pulse on folks, especially that emotional side, which perhaps you didn't typically investigate so deeply. I wonder, when it's business as usual, you know, it's last July, as the head of HR for a big organization, is there like a number or two, which is your sine qua non, like this is the metric that I think is the most important metric in our business? And is it different these last few months?
Yeah, the metric that we tend to pay a lot of attention to is engagement. And there are several drivers of engagement that come up from the questions in the survey. And we've always had a highly engaged workforce. I mean, people who come to work at Randstad are excited about the opportunity to put other human beings to work every day, to improve their life situation, to help them obtain employment. And so our engagement scores as a company were always enviable as compared to a lot of other organizations. But what we found, and this has also surprised me, during the crisis is that our engagement scores actually went up, and in many cases in a statistically significant way. So not just upward trends, I'm talking about scientifically validated improvement. And some of the questions were triggered around things about how the company had responded, and if you felt like that you had all the tools and resources that you needed to do your job effectively. And those scores in all those series of questions to monitor that engagement, they just quite simply went up. And to this day, we're maintaining that high level still. Here we are, 120 days, you know, or give or less into the crisis. And those scores are still significantly higher than they were pre-COVID.
Wow. And I guess if engagement is your sine qua non, you must be working hand in glove with Malcolm. I mean, the place that people work as they return to it, but also the sort of long-term situation of it, they must be pretty closely coordinated. I wonder, Malcolm, if you've had a piece, you know, you guys announced this interesting partnership with a couple of the other like huge global staffing groups, right, on return to work. And I wonder if an aspect of that is something that sits with you, Malcolm, as well. I guess this thing with, you know, Adecco and Manpower, you guys are all working together to create this whole new approach. Does that flow into the physical spaces and the real estate as well?
Yeah, well, Jim, maybe you can talk a little bit about that kind of allegiance or alliance that we've done with the other partners, and I can talk a little bit more about, you know, what we're physically doing in our space.
Yeah.
So, Jim, do you want to cover the alliance to start with?
Sure. So, not long into the crisis, we as a human capital company and the world's largest human capital company, I helped in an outreach effort with the two other large human capital companies out there. Those companies are Adecco and Manpower. And so the three of us and the CEOs of each of those companies got together very quickly and said, look, when people start to return to the workplace, because we have so much knowledge and data and expertise in that space, we should be taking the lead. We should be working with country federations, with governmental leaders, with others in paving this pathway for what a safe return to work might look like. So we developed several position papers, white papers, I guess would be another way to refer to them, and then actual tooling or advice on tooling that people could utilize to begin to bring people back to work. That process was wildly more successful than any of us thought it was going to be. And I can't tell you how many webinars and other types of things that we've been involved with in providing that expertise and guidance to organizations, large and small. You know, everything from, you know, mom and pop operations employing 2, 3, or 4 people, all the way up to massive, some of the world's largest, you know, corporations and industries have sought that advice and guidance, logged onto the website, checked out that information, and we're continuing to develop it even today, working in our case in the US with the American Staffing Association. So it almost came out of the blue, but we felt like there was a need to get out there in front of this because of all the massive amounts of data that we have that would enable this process to go more smoothly and to, quite honestly, just share what we knew.
Yeah, and
we can just find that on Randstad.com, I guess.
Yeah, if you go to our website, all the Safely Back to Work initiatives are there. Also, the American Staffing Association also has that there, and several other firms that are in the human capital space or organizations like SHRM and the HR Policy Association also have those on their respective website.
Oh, I see. Yeah, and so I presume, Malcolm, you've been visiting that website to find out how you ought to reopen those 300 locations.
Right, exactly. It was, you know, it was when we started to have our recovery plan, what we're going to do. Yeah, that was the first place we already provided ourselves some useful information. So, but yeah, we then ran with that, and you know, we developed a cross-functional team. So you talked about HR and real estate and finance, you know, being together. So we put a team together to talk about a task force of how we were going to be able to safely bring people back to the workplace. So people were working effectively, but how do we effectively bring people back to the workplace? And, you know, the paramount thing for us and foremost was safety first, right? We want people to have an environment that is safe. So we've got a great risk and safety team in our organization that, you know, a lot of their time is focused on when we're putting people to work, that we have safe environments for them. So if it's a forklift truck driver in a warehouse, that they're properly trained for that job. So, but you know, that team is very well equipped, and they put together very comprehensive guidelines of what we should have in place in our offices for when people come back. So, you know, a lot of the things now.
But, you know, Malcolm, since you're technically a finance guy, I'm going to ask you a few precise questions. Let's see if I can stump you. We were speaking earlier, and it sounds like at least your North American HQ is open, but without required attendance, and so like less than 1% of the folks.
Right.
When will all 300 be at least open?
So yeah, so over time is the question. We don't have a stipulation of when that is going to be, but what we've done is we've developed our back to work toolkit, and we've trained all of our 300 locations plus locations on what that toolkit is. We've developed a training module, so the leader of that branch or that location, and in fact, all the people that come back to work, they have to go through the training and go through the checkoff that they understand, and there's a video. And
so
everything. You're
ready. But
we're
you don't
ready.
Have like a day,
exactly.
and you don't have a deadline, so you're not going to force anyone to do it because the circumstances will describe it. But okay, how about an estimate from you then on when will 20% occupancy start happening?
Right. So we right now have we've got 3 corporate locations in the US, and since the middle of June they are officially open. And really we've we want people to feel comfortable that they can come back to work safely. So we've basically said there's two ways you can come to the office. One is if your manager requests that you come in and you agree to it. Or if you request to come in because of whatever your circumstances in and your manager agrees to it. So we do have some rules in place of maximum occupancy that we're allowing. So we have a 50% occupancy level we're allowing. And we are to ensure the social distancing and so on. We've also been developing a tool to help us track that, because one question is, how do we manage that occupancy level? So we've been working for a number of years with a scheduling company, and we have partnered with them called Shiftboard. We use them right now. We partner with them right now to schedule some of our talent taking assignments. So we've partnered with them and we've developed a new tool called People Plan Back to Work, where we can actually schedule office space and monitor that. So we're actually piloting that right now in some of our locations.
On that one too, Malcolm, you don't have a prediction for me on the date, but what you're telling me is you're ready. You've got the tool to cap it at 20 or cap it at 50. But now one more prediction.
Exactly. And let me answer your question. So, right now we've got our corporate offices open. We have about 13% of our locations are open today. Everyone has got the tools to get them open. And really, we haven't been rushing. We are able to effectively work. And so, location by location, some of the locations that have local requirements a little bit stricter, they're probably going to be a little later coming back. And then we have some areas that are really eager to come back. And so every day, some more are opening up. But we haven't stipulated X amount has to be open by a certain date, because we want the safety.
Do you have a guess? Do you have a guess for when it's 100? Not 100% of locations, but 100% of staff. Like when do you think it's sort of back to the way it was last October?
Well, of course, we have to wait and see what local requirements are and if there's a second wave and so on. But really what we've said for our corporate locations right now, we're putting in this kind of comeback when you feel comfortable till the end of the Q3. And then after that, we'll reassess. I don't see before the end of the year us having, getting up to 100%. And we have to see how things develop. 3 months ago, I think we would never have predicted we would be here where we are today.
Well, I'm going to give you a different answer than Malcolm on that one. I'm going to say never. Yeah. And why do I think that? Well, I spent a lot of time, working with fellow heads of human resources and CHROs and those types of things. And of course, this is anecdotal, right? It's based in a small number of people with whom I interact regularly on questions like this. And of that group, but also in our client and customer base of which I'm aware, I do not know of any company that has a 100% return policy in place today, nor one that has a 100% return policy in place in September. And many companies that I know have said that they're not even going to look at such a thing until 2021. So, of course, a lot of this answer will eventually depend upon what happens with the virus and how many waves there are, how many, how long it takes to develop a vaccine and all those types of things. But the thought I would like to leave here with you is that for a lot of working America, not all, because some folks have to be standing in front of a machine to produce a product or to do a task, but for a lot of office America, for a lack of a better term to do it, we have moved the idea of workforce and workplace agility forward 15 to 20 years in the last 90 days. So if you think about that for most of the world, and you look at our current rates of employment, our unemployment rates, and the fact that productivity as a standard hasn't dramatically dropped in most companies or even in most countries, that productivity, if it can be accomplished where you don't have to be in an office, where you don't have to commute to work, where that you don't have to find necessarily a childcare provider or babysitter, assuming schools are in session, and those types of things, there's never going to be a reason to return to the old ways.
Yeah, we're not going back. I mean, I couldn't agree more. But let me press a little further into this topic with you, Jim. You guys have made an impressive commitment to reskilling tens of thousands of people. And I guess you could call that linked to COVID, but I suppose it's linked to a really dramatic, sharp moment we're in economically. huge job loss, big changes in who's going to come back. This could be a moment where economic inequality gets a lot worse when we were hoping we could move in the other direction. We were speaking a little earlier about your business as a bellwether for the economy, for like jobs and hiring and all that. Give me a little bit how you're thinking about this. I mean, you have an important role to play. Presumably you think of yourselves as having a lot of responsibility as well. What's happening right now? And how are you tackling some of it?
Well, this whole idea of needing to upskill, new skill, and reskill is something that we've been looking at for a couple of years. And the current crisis, but both the COVID crisis, but also the social justice crisis in our country right now, has really, in my mind, just brought a spotlight onto the need to ensure that we have the opportunity for all people to gain new skill and new capability as they see fit for their continued success. So we began to really try to understand what those gaps were and where the holes were out there in society around the need for skill development. We partnered with an outside vendor who could actually help us with the tooling itself that one would need for people to go to actually upskill, new skill, or reskill. And what we found, just to give you a case of how this would work, we interview a candidate for a particular IT position, for example, and we find that they may be lacking a particular development skill for that particular programming language or that particular task that was needed. And yet the candidate had all the other requisite essential job capabilities to perform that task. We can now send that person into this task to gain that skill and that expertise, and then whenever they come out, they're immediately placeable into almost a new role, assuming that the qualifications of that job were the same. That process we thought was at first going to be almost 100% focused on technical development of skills and capabilities, and that's still a huge component of it. But the other thing that we find that's very, very interesting is the development of softer skill capabilities that many employers report are missing in employees who are applying for positions today. These are skills like influencing, persuasion, negotiation, even softer science, emotional intelligence skills. And with younger employees in particular, and we've done a lot of research in this area, the impact of the digital generation, the digital natives that are out there in what we call Generation Z, those folks have never known a world without digital access and capability to at almost any time, anywhere, as long as there was a device and a wireless signal. And so we've been focusing more on the competencies that are going to be required, both on the soft skill side, while not foregoing the technological development that a lot of people need to have just to be able to do better in their jobs today. So whether it's upskilling, new skilling, or reskilling, we're trying to.
But who are you training? Jim? I guess you've got sort of a huge community. I mean, if there's thousands and thousands of folks who are working for you and through you at your clients, there's a huge pool of other folks that are on and off over the course of years, presumably, right? I mean, the audience must be millions. And then is that the community that you're trying to build up some of the capabilities in?
That among other communities as well, but yes, absolutely. And what I found interesting, and I alluded to this a little bit earlier in one of the answers to you, is the appetite for this has surpassed what we believed it would be. So I believe today's environment has really shined a light on the need to have as good of overall skill capability as you can possibly have. And people are taking us up on this opportunity. And Amal, one of the things I was going to say is, we've made a commitment with the U.S. Department of Labor that we will purposefully upskill, new skill, and reskill 40,000 people just to start, over the course of the next years, and we will deliver that.
Wow.
I think that number will be far exceeded, but we signed up for 40,000.
Wow. That is really impressive. The sort of long range thinking that's embedded in that is inspiring. I mean, it's because I suppose the society you operate in, its health is a big part of the business being successful and sort of continuing to feed back into it. Maybe we can connect a little bit in that spirit of longer range thinking to the crisis at hand on racial justice and where that takes us. I mean, of all the difficulties Knotel has managed to find itself in front of, I mean, being a startup in any business is not easy. you're nothing and you're trying to get somewhere, and you start getting big and you have lots of obligations, you have competitors. Real estate business, not simple. I mean, Malcolm, you could sympathize. It has knives are out all day long. And then the economic intensity. So, as our business was getting big, we were navigating our way to sort of the next plateau. And now this last 90 days, the economic and the virus kind of as waves of intensity. But I think the sharpest and most difficult thing we've had to deal with is just the swell of intensity from our own people about what they were seeing outside and how they felt it reflected back inside. How was our company set up? And, I don't know if we've gone further than, I don't know if we've gone far enough, but we've really committed our people to a really long-ranging mission around racial justice and social justice. Maybe 50 people in the company are part of a team of folks that are working on a whole bunch of different initiatives. Everything from some of the most basic things around unconscious bias to having really big long-term 5-year goals around measurable KPIs. And I don't know, I mean, when you tackle social justice and treat it like a business objective, it's suddenly very different from the old way when it was like oh yeah, we need some D&I metrics to get published. I wonder if you could comment a little bit. I mean, your obligations are far greater than Knotel. We're just a few hundred people, but you look out on a bigger horizon.
Yeah, I will tell you that at least in my career, I cannot think of a time period where a more introspective view of both yourself, your company, your community, and your society is required than right now. I know in my own mind, I always thought that as the head of human resources, my job was to ensure that there was a level playing field in my company and in the folks that I had responsibility for. But I've come to realize in the last 90 days or so that it was not my job to ensure that there was a level playing field. It was my job to ensure that all the team was on the field. And if the crisis has brought nothing else to my attention, it's that. So Randstad was not new in this whole diversity, inclusion, equality, and equity space. We've been ahead of that curve at least as far as thinking about inclusive practices and learning and development and monitoring and measuring ourselves related to that. But this crisis in particular has taught us, I think, that we need to think more about what it is that we're doing and the implications particularly for people of color, and in today's moment, particularly African-American, Black and brown employees out there. So we've done more and more to take a look at that to ensure that we're bringing those ideas forward. We very much like you, there are both short-term and long-term things that we need to be doing. We have always had what we call business resource groups. Some company call them employee resource groups, but they basically have the same idea, right? Where that you bring together groups of people, both who fit, to a particular interest group and are allies of those people of particular interest, and then listen to what they have to say and use that to form who you are as a company and who you are as a society within your greater community, and then take actions to ensure that you're doing whatever you feel that the gaps are. And I've been very happy and very pleased with how our organization has responded to it, but I've also been incredibly humbled and tried to be very introspective myself in assuring that my view of this was the right view. And if you're the head of human resources, you need to surround yourself by people who can constantly challenge that view to ensure it is the right course. And I'm fortunate enough in Randstad to have that group of people that surrounded me to ensure that we are steering the right course for the future of what we want our company to be.
Does it mean there's whole new programs, whole new goals you've set if you're going to get everyone on the field? Is it different than the past?
It is different. I think we're now talking about it differently. One of the best things that early on came out of this was much more dialogue. And there was so much healing that needed to happen and so many stories that needed to be heard, some of which keep me up at night, right? I mean, some of the things I heard, because my view was just different. And I was always open to those views, but this crisis brought those views forward. and they were learning moments, they were emotional moments, but they were also transformative moments. And those moments, I think, turn into a movement, which turns into change for our society. And we just can't miss this opportunity to do a major course correction to ensure that the things that we want as a society are actually out there and available for all.
So maybe
Jim,
just a final chance to, oh, go ahead, Malcolm.
No, I was just going to say, Jim, I think over the last few weeks, we've had many what we call ready chats. So they're basically open mic environments where people can come and share their views. And, it's definitely, I think, that communication, talking, maybe talking about things we're kind of a little uncomfortable of talking about. And I think that's really been very insightful and very helpful.
Oh, I think Malcolm may be digitizing there.
Yeah, he's become immortal. But yeah, maybe one thing to tie together some of these themes. So, as we return to work, we're not just returning to an antiviral office, I guess, right? We're now returning with a new and enlivened sense of racial justice and social justice, certainly in America, but I think, absolutely a global matter. And I wonder to what extent you think about these things as tying together, or an opportunity has been presented for the whole company to be different.
Yeah, it certainly has been. And I actually think of this as two crises, right? Which when they come together can provide the impetus for that transformative change that we've all been seeking, particularly as it relates to inclusion, equality, and equity. So together, those two things in my mind are going to shape and really transform the way that leaders hold other leaders accountable, how that groups within companies and organizations are going to hold their leadership accountable. But it will also, in my mind, really help set a standard for what might lie ahead. And the capability that we have as a society to adjust and to learn from these types of things is something that we absolutely cannot forget, and particularly in this moment. When you look at those two major crises, we have to seize the moment to drive that change that's required out there for equality and equity.
Your leadership on this is inspiring, Jim. I will follow you. I suspect the 100,000 staff at Randstad is as inspired as I am. Malcolm and Jim, thank you so much for being part of this conversation today.
Yeah, very welcome.
Thank you.
I think our audience learned a lot, but maybe no one more than I did. So I'm really appreciative. Thank you, guys.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We will have the recorded version of this that we'll be able to share later, and maybe we'll even stick up the link to the recommendations that Randstad has made with its partners on return to work. Thank you, guys. Bye.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.